There is something happening inside your dog's body right now that your vet has never once mentioned in any appointment you have ever paid for. Not in the first visit when you described the scratching. Not in the follow-up when the medication stopped working. Not in the specialist referral that cost you $400 and ended with another prescription. Not once in any exam room, in any conversation, has the actual biological cause of your dog's chronic scratching ever been written on a piece of paper and handed to you. And it was not an accident. Right now, 90 million dogs in the United States scratch, bite, lick, and chew at their own skin every single day. Paws that bleed. Ears that never stop being infected. Coats that thin and dull no matter what shampoo you switch to. Hot spots that heal and return in the same location on the same dog, month after month after month. The veterinary industry generates over $35 billion annually in the United States alone. Skin and allergy complaints represent one of the top 3 reasons for vet visits across the entire country. It is not a coincidence that the most common problem is also the one with the most expensive, most recurring, least permanent treatment options on the market. You have tried the medicated shampoo. It worked for 4 days and the scratching came back before you had finished the bottle. You have tried the antihistamines. Benadryl every night, drowsy dog, temporary relief, full return of symptoms within a week of stopping. You have tried the elimination diet? 12 weeks of a single protein source, a dog who refused to eat, and at the end of it, scratching that never actually stopped. You have tried the prescription. Maybe it was Apoquel. Maybe it was Cytopoint. It worked. You were relieved. And then you looked at the refill cost and realized this was not a cure. This was a subscription. $80, $120, month after month. For a dog who still occasionally scratches, still has ear issues, still licks his paws every single night before bed, because the medication was never designed to fix the problem. It was designed to manage it, indefinitely, at your expense. There is a powder that costs less than $1 per serving. It requires no prescription. It involves no vet visit. It is available at feed supply stores and online suppliers for less than $8 for a container that will last your dog 3 months. The biological compounds inside this powder have been documented in agricultural and veterinary science literature since the 1950s. The same pharmaceutical companies that charge you $120 a month studied these compounds before they developed their patented alternatives. They did not discover that the natural compounds failed. They discovered that the natural compounds could not be patented. And so they built a drug pipeline around a synthetic version and quietly buried the original in the agricultural supply chain where dog owners would never think to look. This is the story of what is actually happening inside your dog's skin, and the industry that has spent 4 decades making sure you never find out. Stay with me, because what I am about to walk you through will change the way you think about every vet visit you have ever had and every one you are planning to schedule. We are going to go back to where the science actually started. We are going to walk through exactly what is happening inside your dog's body when that scratching begins, layer by layer, the way it was never explained to you in any exam room. We are going to look at the financial architecture that was built on top of that biology. The numbers are documented and they are staggering. And then I am going to give you the exact compound, the exact mechanism, the exact steps, and the honest limitations, because there are some, and any source that does not tell you the limitations is selling you something harder than the truth. If you are watching this because you are exhausted from watching your dog suffer while writing checks to an industry that keeps offering you the next thing that almost works, you are in the right place. Subscribe and hit the bell. Because what we cover here does not stay on the surface. This is where we go down to the root. The year was 1959. A team of agricultural researchers at a livestock disease management station in the Midwest was studying chronic inflammatory skin conditions in cattle and sheep. Specific animals in specific herds were developing persistent dermatitis, coat degradation, and relentless hide irritation that resisted every topical treatment available at the time. These were not sick animals in any traditional sense. Their blood work was unremarkable. Their temperatures were normal. They were eating, drinking, gaining weight. But the inflammation kept returning, and nobody could explain the mechanism. What the research team discovered over the following 2 years of observation quietly reshaped the way agricultural scientists understood the relationship between digestion and skin health in mammals. They noticed that animals in certain pastures, grazing on certain natural forage, showed dramatically lower rates of inflammatory skin response. The differentiating factor was not the grass. It was the wild plants growing alongside the grass. Specifically, plants with extraordinarily high concentrations of flavonoid compounds. Quercetin in particular appeared in multiple sample analyses at concentrations far above anything in the standard feed supply. When the researchers isolated quercetin and added it to the feed of affected animals, the inflammatory skin response dropped measurably within 3 weeks. Not masked, not suppressed by pharmaceutical intervention. The underlying inflammatory signal actually reduced. The mechanism, as it was documented in the agricultural science journals of the early 1960s, involved quercetin's ability to inhibit mast cell degranulation. Mast cells are the immune cells responsible for releasing histamine throughout the body. When mast cells are triggered, they release histamine into surrounding tissue. Histamine causes itch, redness, swelling, and the full cascade of allergic skin response that every dog owner with a scratching animal knows intimately. Quercetin physically stabilized the mast cell membrane. It reduced the volume of histamine released, and it did this not by suppressing the immune system the way steroids do, but by interrupting the specific signal pathway that was misfiring. By the mid-1960s, separate research teams studying gut health in livestock had documented a second mechanism that would prove equally important. They found that disruptions to the intestinal microbiome in mammals created a condition now commonly called leaky gut, where the intestinal lining becomes permeable, allowing undigested protein particles to pass into the bloodstream. The immune system treats these particles as foreign invaders and launches an inflammatory response. When this happens systemically and repeatedly, it manifests in the largest organ of the body. The skin. Chronic skin inflammation in many mammals, the research showed, was not a skin problem at all. It was a gut problem. The skin was simply where the inflammation surfaced. The specific probiotic strains that repaired the intestinal lining and reduced systemic histamine load were documented in livestock journals throughout the 1970s. Lactobacillus rhamnosus, Lactobacillus reuteri. Specific strains that rebuilt the gut wall, reduced intestinal permeability, and lowered the volume of histamine produced by gut bacteria imbalance. This research was published, peer-reviewed, documented in veterinary and agricultural science literature across 4 decades. And then the pet pharmaceutical industry arrived. Here is where the story takes a turn that should concern every dog owner in this country. The modern pet pharmaceutical boom began in earnest in the 1990s and accelerated dramatically into the 2000s. The companies building this industry had access to the same agricultural and veterinary science literature that had documented quercetin and probiotic intervention for decades. They studied these compounds, they tested them, they understood the mechanism, and they faced a problem that had nothing to do with science. Quercetin is a naturally occurring flavonoid. You cannot patent a molecule that exists in nature. Lactobacillus rhamnosus grows in fermented foods and soil. You cannot build a subscription drug model around something that costs $8 for a 3-month supply and works without a prescription. So they went in a different direction. They spent years and hundreds of millions of dollars developing synthetic compounds that could achieve a partial version of what quercetin and targeted probiotics did naturally. Oclecitinib, the active compound in Apoquel, works by inhibiting specific JAK enzyme pathways involved in the itch signal. It interrupts the notification. It does not address the gut permeability driving the immune trigger. It does not reduce the systemic histamine load. It silences the alarm while the fire continues burning in the basement. And it requires daily administration indefinitely at a cost that generates over $1 billion annually for a single pharmaceutical company. The natural compounds that addressed the root mechanism existed before the drug was developed. They still exist. They cost less than $1 per serving. And for 70 years, the conversation about your dog's scratching has been carefully directed away from them. Let me walk you through exactly what is happening inside your dog's body when the scratching starts. Not the way it gets explained in a 5-minute vet appointment. The full picture. When your dog scratches, bites at his paws, shakes his head, rubs his face along the carpet, or develops recurring hot spots in the same location every few months, you are watching the final event in a chain reaction that started somewhere else entirely. The scratch is not the problem. The scratch is a notification. And every treatment that addresses the scratch without tracing the notification back to its source is a treatment that was designed to be temporary. Here is the chain. Your dog's intestinal lining is a single cell layer thick. It is designed to be selectively permeable, allowing digested nutrients through while keeping undigested particles, bacteria, and toxins contained inside the digestive tract. When the microbiome that lines and protects that intestinal wall becomes disrupted, through antibiotics, through poor diet, through chronic stress, through repeated pharmaceutical intervention, the tight junctions between those cells begin to loosen. Undigested protein particles pass through the intestinal wall into the bloodstream. The immune system identifies them as foreign. It launches an inflammatory response. Every time your dog eats and digests food through a compromised intestinal lining, the immune system activates. This is not an occasional event. This is happening 3 times a day. Every single day, a disrupted gut microbiome does not just allow particles to escape. It also changes the bacterial composition of the gut itself. Certain bacteria that proliferate in a disrupted microbiome produce histamine as a metabolic byproduct. This is called histamine intolerance driven by gut dysbiosis. Your dog's body is now managing histamine coming from 2 directions simultaneously, from the immune response to the particles escaping through the gut wall, and from the bacteria in the gut producing it directly. The enzyme responsible for breaking down histamine before it enters the bloodstream is called diamine oxidase, or DAO. In a healthy gut, DAO production is sufficient to manage normal histamine load. In a disrupted gut, DAO production drops. Histamine that should be broken down before it ever reaches circulation is now entering the bloodstream at volumes the body cannot process. Histamine circulating in the bloodstream reaches mast cells distributed throughout the body's tissue, including and especially the tissue just beneath the skin. Mast cells are triggered by elevated histamine. When they degranulate, they release their own histamine payload into the surrounding tissue. This is the itch. This is the redness. This is the inflammation that makes your dog bite at his paws until they bleed. This is the signal that shows up in the ears as chronic infection, on the belly as redness, along the back as hot spots. The skin is not infected. The skin is not diseased. The skin is broadcasting a signal that originated in the gut. When you bring your dog to the vet and receive a steroid injection or a daily Apoquel prescription, the inflammatory signal is suppressed. The scratching slows or stops. You experience relief. Your dog experiences relief, and you believe reasonably that the problem has been addressed. 3 weeks later, sometimes 4, sometimes 6, the scratching comes back. Sometimes it comes back harder, the ears get worse, a new hotspot appears. You call the vet, you schedule a follow-up, you refill the prescription. Here is what happened in the interval between the relief and the return. The steroid suppressed the immune response but did not repair the gut wall. The Apoquel blocked the JAK pathway but did not reduce the histamine load. The root mechanism kept running. The gut stayed permeable. The microbiome stayed disrupted. The histamine kept accumulating. And the pharmaceutical intervention, specifically the antibiotic courses that often accompany skin infection treatment, further disrupted the microbiome that was already the source of the problem. Each treatment cycle left the gut in worse condition than the one before. Each round of antibiotics reduced the population of beneficial bacteria that produce DAO and maintain the intestinal lining. The histamine load increased. The immune trigger became more sensitive. The scratching returned faster and more intensely with each cycle. This is not an accident of biology. This is what happens when you treat a notification as if it were the source. The vet who writes that prescription learned about the gut-skin axis in veterinary school. The research connecting intestinal permeability to chronic dermatitis in dogs has been published in peer-reviewed veterinary literature for over 20 years. The question that deserves an answer is why the treatment consistently addresses the symptom and never once addresses the gut. Let me show you the numbers behind the system you have been living inside. According to the American Pet Products Association, Americans spent over $35 billion on veterinary care in 2024. Skin and allergy complaints are among the top 3 reasons for vet visits in dogs nationally. The average dog owner dealing with chronic scratching and allergy symptoms spends between $2,700 and $4,700 annually managing the condition across vet visits, prescriptions, medicated products, and specialist referrals. Here is what that spending looks like broken down. Apoquel, the most commonly prescribed daily allergy medication for dogs, costs between $80 and $120 per month depending on the dog's weight. That is $960 to $1,040 per year, for a drug that must be administered every single day and produces return of symptoms within days of stopping. Cytopoint, the injectable alternative, is administered monthly at a vet visit and costs between $80 and $150 per injection, plus the appointment fee. That is $960 to $1,800 annually. Medicated shampoos prescribed or recommended for skin management run between $20 and $45 per bottle at a use frequency of every 1 to 2 weeks. That is $300 to $500 per year on a product that addresses the surface of a problem rooted in the gut. A dermatology specialist referral, which many vets recommend after the first or second prescription cycle fails, runs between $200 and $400 for the initial consultation alone. Full allergy panel testing, which the specialist will often recommend, adds $300 to $600. The immunotherapy treatment that may follow adds another $150 to $300 every few months. Zoetis, the pharmaceutical company that manufactures Apoquel, reported revenues specifically attributable to that single drug exceeding $1 billion annually in recent reporting years. That is one drug for one symptom, in one species, generating $1 billion per year from owners who were never told that a flavonoid compound documented in veterinary science literature since the 1960s interrupts the mechanism at the source for less than $8 for a 3-month supply. The pipeline works like this. Scratching begins. Visit, antihistamine prescribed, fails to resolve. Apoquel prescribed. Monthly refills begin. Side effects emerge, increased susceptibility to infection, potential liver involvement with long-term use. Antibiotic prescribed for secondary skin infection. Microbiome further disrupted. Scratching intensifies after antibiotic course ends. Specialist referral recommended. Allergy testing performed. Immunotherapy initiated. Scratching continues at a managed level. Dog remains on daily medication indefinitely. Owner remains in the billing cycle indefinitely. Each step generates revenue for a different sector of the same ecosystem. The dog keeps scratching. The industry keeps invoicing. And the quercetin sitting in the agricultural supply chain for 7 decades keeps costing $8 a container. If you have made it this far, you understand more about what is driving your dog's skin than most pet owners in this country ever will. Share this with someone who is still refilling that prescription every month. What they do not know is costing them hundreds of dollars a year, and it is costing their dog far more than that. Here is exactly what the powder is, how it works, and precisely how to use it. The formulation that addresses the biological cascade I walked you through has 3 components. Each one targets a different layer of the chain. Together they interrupt the cycle at the root, rather than silencing the notification at the surface. Quercetin is a flavonoid compound found naturally in certain plants and forage vegetation. It is the primary active agent. Its mechanism is mast cell stabilization. Quercetin binds to the mast cell membrane and inhibits degranulation, the process by which mast cells release histamine into surrounding tissue. It does not suppress the immune system. It does not block JAK pathways. It stabilizes the specific cell responsible for the itch signal at the point of release. In documented animal studies, quercetin has also demonstrated anti-inflammatory properties that reduce systemic inflammatory markers independent of the mast cell effect. This is the compound the agricultural researchers documented in the early 1960s. It has not changed. The science has not changed. The cost has not changed. Not all probiotics address the specific mechanism driving allergy-related scratching. Generic probiotic blends that contain dozens of strains at low concentrations will not produce the gut repair effect documented in the research. The specific strains with documented evidence for intestinal lining repair and histamine reduction are Lactobacillus rhamnosus and Lactobacillus reuteri. These strains have been shown in peer-reviewed research to reduce intestinal permeability, increase DAO enzyme production, and lower gut-derived histamine. They rebuild the environment that was disrupted by antibiotic use, poor diet, and repeated pharmaceutical intervention. This is the foundation repair. Without this component, you are reducing the histamine signal without addressing the source that keeps generating it. Diamine oxidase is the enzyme responsible for breaking down dietary histamine in the digestive tract before it enters the bloodstream. In dogs with disrupted microbiomes, DAO production is insufficient to handle the histamine load. Supplementing DAO directly reduces the volume of histamine entering circulation from dietary sources. Combined with the probiotic strains that increase the body's own DAO production over time, this creates both immediate reduction in histamine load and long-term restoration of the body's ability to manage it without supplementation. Together, these 3 components do the following. Quercetin stabilizes mast cells and reduces the inflammatory signal at the skin level. The probiotic strains repair the gut lining that is allowing the immune trigger to fire repeatedly. The DAO enzyme reduces the histamine entering circulation from dietary sources while the gut heals. The cascade is interrupted at 3 separate points simultaneously, not masked, not suppressed, interrupted at the root. Here is exactly how to apply this. Step 1. Identify your dog's pattern before you spend $1. Track for 1 week when the scratching is worst. Is it worst in the morning before eating? That points toward environmental histamine or nighttime accumulation. Is it worse 1 to 2 hours after meals? That points heavily toward dietary histamine and gut permeability. Does it spike seasonally? That suggests environmental allergen load overwhelming an already compromised gut barrier. Does it correlate with antibiotic courses or medication changes? That confirms microbiome disruption as the primary driver. This costs you nothing and tells you exactly which layer of the cascade is the dominant driver in your specific dog. Step 2. Source the formulation correctly. You are looking for a supplement that contains quercetin, Lactobacillus rhamnosus, Lactobacillus reuteri, and digestive enzyme support, including DAO. These are available individually or in combined formulations at feed supply stores, agricultural supply retailers, and from online suppliers who serve the livestock and working animal market. You are not looking for this in the pet aisle of a big box retail store. The pet aisle version exists, is marketed with a dog on the label, and costs 3 times as much for a fraction of the concentration. The feed supply version has no dog on the label and costs $8. It is the same compound at a higher concentration for a lower price. Look for a quercetin concentration of at least 250 milligrams per serving for a medium-sized dog. Look for the specific probiotic strains by name on the label. Generic terms like beneficial bacteria or probiotic blend without strain identification are not sufficient. Step 3. Administer correctly and consistently. Mix the powder into your dog's food. Dogs cannot taste quercetin at standard doses and will not refuse the food. A medium dog between 30 and 60 pounds requires approximately 250 to 500 milligrams of quercetin daily and a probiotic dose of at least 1 billion CFU of the targeted strains. Start at the lower end of the dosing range for the first week to allow the gut to adjust to probiotic introduction. Increase to the full dose in week 2. Consistency matters more than dose size. A lower dose every single day outperforms a higher dose administered irregularly. Step 4. Eliminate high histamine foods from the diet simultaneously. This step is free and takes 7 days, and it will accelerate results dramatically. High histamine foods that commonly appear in commercial dog food include fermented proteins, certain fish meals, and heavily processed meat byproducts. For the first 30 days of the protocol, feed a single fresh protein source that is naturally low in histamine. Rabbit, turkey, or fresh lamb are the best options. Plain cooked rice or sweet potato as a carbohydrate source. No commercial kibble for 30 days if possible. If full dietary change is not possible, simply removing the highest histamine ingredients reduces the load the DAO enzyme has to manage and gives the gut repair process a cleaner runway. Step 5. Track and give it time. Here is what the timeline realistically looks like. In week 1, you will likely see no dramatic change. The quercetin is beginning mast cell stabilization, but the gut repair is in early stages. In week 2, most dogs show a measurable reduction in scratching frequency, not elimination reduction. The paw licking may slow. The ear shaking may become less constant. In week 3 and 4, the gut lining has begun to repair sufficiently to reduce the volume of immune triggers entering circulation. The scratching may drop by 50 to 70%. By week 6 to 8, in most dogs with gut-driven chronic scratching, the cycle has been interrupted at the root, and the symptom load reduces proportionally. Now, I need to be honest with you about the limitations. This approach will not reverse skin damage or hair loss caused by years of steroid use. The fur will grow back over time, but the powder does not accelerate tissue repair. If your dog has been on Apoquel or steroids for more than 2 years, the microbiome disruption is significant, and the gut repair timeline will be longer than 8 weeks. Some dogs require 3 to 4 months before the gut lining is sufficiently restored to see full reduction in symptoms. This is not a failure of the compounds. It is the timeline of biological repair. If your dog has an active bacterial skin infection with open wounds, that infection requires appropriate veterinary treatment. Enzymatic and probiotic intervention addresses the root cause of recurring infection, but it does not treat an acute active infection. That distinction matters, and any source that tells you otherwise is being reckless with your dog's welfare. And if your dog's scratching is driven primarily by contact allergens, specific environmental triggers like a particular grass or mold, the gut protocol will reduce the inflammatory sensitivity to those triggers, but will not eliminate the trigger itself. Environmental management has to accompany the internal protocol in those cases. Here is the number that matters despite all of those honest caveats. The quercetin and probiotic protocol costs $8 to $12 for a 90-day supply. The Apoquel refill costs $80 to $120 per month with no defined endpoint. The honest question is not whether the natural compounds are worth trying. The honest question is why, in every appointment about your dog scratching, the conversation was directed toward the prescription and away from the $8 option that addresses the mechanism the prescription never touched. Let me bring this together in a way the industry would prefer you never heard stated this plainly. Quercetin's mast cell stabilizing properties were documented in the 1960s. The gut-skin axis connecting intestinal permeability to chronic dermatitis was published in peer-reviewed literature through the 1970s and 1980s. The specific probiotic strains that reduce gut-derived histamine have been studied since the 1990s. The science that forms the foundation of this protocol is not new. It is not experimental. It is not fringe. It is 60 years old, and it has been sitting in agricultural supply chains and scientific journals, while a drug industry built a billion-dollar revenue stream on a synthetic partial solution that requires permanent daily administration to maintain its effect. Apoquel was approved in 2013. The science it was developed around had existed for 50 years before the first pill was manufactured. The researchers who built the drug understood quercetin's mechanism. They understood the gut-skin connection. They chose a different direction, not because the natural compounds failed scientifically, but because the natural compounds failed financially. You cannot file a patent on a plant flavonoid. You cannot build a recurring revenue model around a compound that costs $8 for 3 months and addresses the root cause without requiring refills. So they built a product that addresses part of the mechanism, requires daily administration indefinitely, costs over $1,000 a year, and generates $1 billion in annual revenue from owners who were given no context, no alternative, and no explanation of the biological cascade their dog was actually experiencing. Your dog's scratching is not a pharmaceutical deficiency. It is a biological signal, a gut lining that needs repair, a histamine load that exceeds the body's capacity to clear it, a mast cell response that has been firing without interruption because the trigger was never removed. These are biological problems. They have biological answers. Those answers have existed for longer than the industry that profits from directing you away from them. The quercetin is still $8. The science is still 60 years old. The cascade is still interruptible at the root. None of that changed. The only thing that kept it from your dog was the financial architecture built between you and the information you needed. Every dog owner who learns the root cause is one fewer customer trapped in the refill cycle. Every share of this reaches someone whose dog is still scratching through the third prescription that was never designed to be the last one. Subscribe because the next one goes deeper. And what is buried there has been waiting even longer than this.